Welcome back to Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I am James Falk. Thanks for joining us. This journey on Neon Galactic started with the wonder and magic surrounding UAPs, the presence of non-human intelligence, and all the other anomalies of human experience. Those interests still drive me and leave me tantalized every night when I lay in bed and consider the ramifications. But more important now, I believe, is the broader question of worldview and what we do with it. If we accept that the anomalies we've been discussing are all true, and I do, then we need ontologies that can accommodate them. The system we've inherited, physicalist materialism and all that follows, has led us to the long-running and now accelerating degradation of our planet, its people, and any opportunities we may still have to wake the hell up. We've been told that real science and rigorous thinking disqualify deep connectivity between mind, matter, universe, and spirit. This, I've come to believe, is a smokescreen. Science isn't meant to trap us in failed paradigms. It's a mode of investigation, a method of inquiry, and a path to discovery. Yet just as the Catholic Church once burned heretics at the stake, so much of science today is bent on controlling narratives, securing tenure, building weapons, and manufacturing dividends. This debasement of scientific principles goes on even as we exploit the discoveries of quantum physics and somehow ignore that these deep and subtle truths often rhyme with ancient mystery traditions and the mystical epiphanies that hatch them. Yet synthesis is possible. We need to embrace the ramifications of what we've learned, permit ourselves to explore how these new truths redefine our place in the universe, and use that rediscovered miracle to foster new wholeness. Our guest today, author and thinker Paul Levy, has been on this show before. We spoke then of how the materialistic worldview has become a kind of mind virus, one that corrupts our thinking and blinds us to higher truths. The recent reissue of his book, The Quantum Revelation, expands this argument and describes in great detail, through the words of our greatest scientific minds, how a full integration of quantum principles may well be the cure we need to exorcise the Wetiko demon once and for all. This is the path toward survival, toward the embracing of all human experience, and the end of enforced realities. Can we finally toss the old maps to nowhere and find our way through this wilderness? What would such a scientific reformation look like? And who gets to play Martin Luther? Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be here with you. Really, thanks for the invite.
I loved your book, and it sort of came at the perfect time in a lot of my research and discussions with friends and colleagues about how I feel like we've, basically reached the end of the useful life of the materialistic ontology that we're all kind of living in. Obviously, it's gotten us a lot of pretty gadgets and toys, and we use it every day for the science that for which it applies. But there's a lot more going on in the universe, and I think that that's becoming more and more clear. And you make that argument really well in the book. Um, Let's start with you're not a physicist, and this is a book about physics. And I thought it was really intriguing how you talk about the relationship that you have with a friend who sort of helped you in developing the ideas and going through, this stuff, and also how you used this research. It was almost kind of a spiritual journey through the material. You talk about quantum gnosis and whatnot. Can you discuss how your research into this realm of science sort of became a spiritual quest and how that's possible given that it's, science?
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, to create context for my work and for the book, I had, and based on incredible trauma and deep suffering and pain in 1981, a life-transforming spiritual awakening that almost killed me. And, that's a whole story in and of itself. But basically, I didn't realize it then. I didn't have the language, but I had this quantum leap from one universe to another that simulated the one I had grown up in. Was 24 years old at that time, but couldn't be more different in that the realm of what was possible had expanded to unimaginable degrees. And then over the years, I found quantum physics, and I'm not a physicist, I'm just a creative person. And the more I began to go down the rabbit hole of quantum physics, the more I began to realize they were mapping and articulating the very world I had found myself in that was very much like a dream. Because that was the way I was describing it to people, was like, oh my God, I'm realizing we're having a collectively shared dream. and that we're each dream characters in each other's dreams. We're interconnected. We're not separate. And whatever's happening in our world, we are dreaming up into materialization each and every moment. But because we're not aware of that, we're doing it unconsciously in a way that's guaranteed to be, instead of constructive, destructive. So at a certain point, I just went so far down the rabbit hole that it just blew my mind around what quantum physics was pointing at. And because quantum physics, in essence, like I make clear in my book, is showing us the dreamlike nature of reality. It's actually empirically proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that we're having a dream, not metaphorically that this is like a dream, but this is a dream. It's nothing other than a dream. But the typical classically trained or even quantum physically trained corporate academic physicists are not prepared to take in the revelation that is quantum physics because it's a living revelation. They're not prepared in their training to understand, oh, this science that we're all part of is revealing that we're having a collectively shared dream. So here I am, just a non-physicist who, based on my own experience, is pointing out, well, if you look at what quantum physics is revealing, i.e., there's no objective world. Before quantum physics, physicists were thinking there was a external world separate from us, and we were just passively witnessing and observing it. Quantum physics comes along and says, no, no, no. The idea of an objective world is just that, an idea in our minds with no correlate in reality. And even more than that, the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe that we're observing. That's a description of a dream. Because in a dream, if you change the way you observe something, the dream has no choice but to instantaneously shapeshift and reflect back that change in viewpoint, because a dream is nothing other than a reflection of our own mind. That's what quantum physics has discovered. And when you go down that rabbit hole, you begin to realize, wait a second, what that means is that the act of observation for each and every one of us is creative.
Hmm.
And that unlocks that introduces us to this incredibly vast creative agency and power we all have. That's part of our nature. But because we're unconscious of it, we're not, in a conscious way accessing it. And so then, the powers that be, the universe at large is more than happy to plug into our own unconscious creative power and genius and turn it against us. And that's as we see evidence all over the world right now. So I'm pointing out that quantum physics is that it's this revelation, it's offering us the medicine for the malady that our species has fallen into, which I've written 3 books about there being a mind virus. And, instead of people hearing that and thinking it's all woo-woo and new agey, all that it means is that the origin of our collective madness and the solution is to be found within our psyches. And that's a no-brainer. Where else can it be found? And quantum physics has already changed the course of history with all the technology that's been developed. But the people who study this stuff say that's just the low-hanging fruit. What they were all in agreement, the founding fathers, about what they were all saying that, yeah, the real effect of the quantum gnosis, of the quantum revelation, is going to be within our minds. It's going to expand our consciousness to previously unimaginable degrees. It's actually introducing us to our incredible intrinsic power to create our experience. And it's a game changer, but it's only been 100 years. When you have such a radical discovery, it typically takes centuries for people to begin to grok what they've tapped into. And so, we're still at the beginning stages of integrating what quantum physics is showing us. But I could just say one more thing to contextualize, like the quantum physicists, the real founding fathers, who were saying, we still haven't found this central idea. What is the main point of quantum physics? Even though it's changed the course of history, we've developed all this technology, and the image that is used, they say if you come across an automobile in a forest and you've never seen an automobile, you have no idea what its function is, and you turn on the turn signal or the lights or the radio, and you're amazed, but you still haven't figured out what is the central idea of this thing, this automobile. And they say same thing with quantum physics. We haven't figured out what is the central point. And here I am, a non-physicist who's just saying, oh, the central point is that it's revealing to us that we're dreaming. It's unlocking to us our creative genius because we are the dreamers of the dream. And and then they say, these physicists, they say, when we realize the central point, we're going to basically be of the opinion of how could I have been so blind for so long? And interestingly, the mind virus is a form of blindness. And so quantum physics is actually helping to heal that blindness.
Yeah. What's interesting, one of the things that's interesting about your book is that you have exhaustive quotes from a lot of the luminaries of the early quantum physics movement, and they're revealed as these really adventurous, forward-thinking folks who are absolutely wrestling with all of the ramifications of what they're learning. And like you were mentioning, we've kind of pushed that off, the whole shut up and calculate movement in physics, right? Don't worry about what this is telling us. Let's just focus on the fact that it makes it so that when we make predictions, we can, get the results that we expect. And so that's the outer limits of what we you need to do with it. It's interesting that also that you say, it's only been 100 years. Part of me is like, it's been 100 years, and I think that's some of the impatience that our culture has bred into us. And maybe we all need to take a deep breath, but we're also up approaching precipice, it seems like we've kind of almost reached the end of a road where materialism has led us. I know that you're a healer. You see people and patients and you kind of help them understand their place in the universe. How do you think on a individual level and on a societal level we can deploy this gnosis to encourage healing in our own lives and culture?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, to create context, we are in the middle of a psychic epidemic, a collective psychosis of titanic proportions, where, like you just referenced, we're destroying ourselves, where it's like we're at the edge of a cliff, or we're in a no-win situation. So many people are filled with helplessness and despair. And I point out again and again in my work that the medicine is to connect with our true nature. And what does that even mean? Because that's such a cliche. Our true nature, by its very nature, is creative. So, in other words, the medicine is to connect with our intrinsic creative nature and to express and embody being creative, to express ourselves creatively. And quantum physics, it couldn't be more perfect to show us that, because by showing us that there's nothing objective separate from awareness. In other words, it's impossible to have an experience of the world without awareness being a factor in the equation. And so by showing us that, it's actually showing us that each of us, by the way we interpret our experience, the way we interpret reality, the way we place meaning on what's happening in our life, we are creating our experience. There's no one else doing that. Whatever's happening is happening in the world. We then, by the way we place meaning on it, create our experience. And that places a big responsibility on us, but it also unlocks our creative agency. And you see, here's where quantum physics, it's actually promoting itself to be a spiritual path. Because when you realize, wait, this world isn't objective in the way that I've been trained to think it is, well, what does that mean about me? Because if there's nothing out there that's objective, and by objective, I mean that exists in its own right, just intrinsically from its own side, because everything is interdependent with everything else. There's no, in a sense, like, independent, intrinsic existing thing separate from other seemingly independent things. Everything is interrelated, like it is in a
Good.
dream. That's what the quantum physicists discovered, that this universe is quantum on all scales, big and small, quantum through and through, in the sense that in a quantum system, there's no separate things interacting. There's just one seamlessly whole interconnected quantum system, when you see that, when you see, oh, there's nothing objective out there, what happened to the subject? Because as a subject, I need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. If all of a sudden I discover, wait a second, there's nothing out there objective, who am I? You see, quantum physics unknowingly, unwittingly, I think, is actually shedding light on our nature, on who we are, not only on the nature of the universe seemingly out there, but our relationship to that universe out there, and who are we in all of this.
Mm,
And so, I point out that quantum physics is a hidden treasure in Tibetan Buddhism, the practice I do, this tradition, the lineage that I do practice in. There's something called the hidden treasures, and in Tibet, the word
yeah,
terma.
yeah, I
And
love that in the
yeah, and
book.
it's a
It's
real, it's a real
fantastic.
thing. And every, not just Tibetan Buddhism, but I think every spiritual tradition has the idea that there are these like hidden, spiritually enlightening treasures that are hidden in the multidimensional fabric of the universe, including within our own mind.
Yeah,
And right at the time they're needed, they're discovered. And it's very much like just an individual's process. If they get one-sided and off balance, their unconscious will send a dream, and there'll be a symbol, and if they get in resonance with the symbol, it'll bring them back to themselves. It's exactly like that, that this tradition, the Theravada tradition, and this isn't a fairy tale. I mean, the scholars study this stuff in Tibetan Buddhism. It's so profound. It's a way of like keeping the tradition fresh. And they're like, one way to think about these hidden treasures, they're like alarm clocks that are planted to go off right at the time that we need to wake up, or they're like keys that open locks, or like charms that break spells. And I'm pointing out that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma, that we
yeah,
have dreamed up quantum physics into the world and into our minds about 100 years ago as the way to help us to wake up to our nature. And but quantum physics has discovered this universe is a participatory universe, which means that if we don't recognize quantum physics as a terma, then we won't get any benefits. It won't manifest that way. It depends upon our participation in the revelation. Your quantum physics is a living revelation that is so mind-blowing, we don't even have words for it. And yet it will be of no benefit if we don't complete the full circle of the revelation by having the recognition that it is a revelation and what it's revealing about us and our nature and our creative genius.
yeah. It strikes me that in this moment where there's so much enmity politically and there's so much confusion about where we need to be going, and people are really wrestling, at least in my sphere, with how to take action to affect changes that they want, and there's a lot of calling out of people and a lot of anger, a lot of disgust. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that they are creating this pugilistic experience for themselves that isn't necessary, that there's a way to engage with their own reality and the broader reality where they're not constructing confrontation, and I think there's a way to move forward to a higher kinds of truth without that, battle mind. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? I mean,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
that it's what's happening in our world to just be real, to get to the, real essence. It's a mind fuck. Just
mhm,
the incredible propaganda and lies and mind control. And I see it in myself. I see, oh, if I'm seeing something and I think it's true, well, how do I know it's true? Say I think it's true, and then I see somebody who doesn't see it. If I then get dreamed up to try to open their eyes and convince them, well, oftentimes they're going to resist me doing that and experience me as a threat, and I'm even feeding more polarization when I do that. And so, what you're pointing at is really interesting, because one way of understanding what's happening, you see, I go back to the work of Jung, who says the problem of our times is we don't understand what's happening in our world. And then he clarifies what's happening is we are making a descent into the darkness of the unconscious. We are encountering the darkness of the soul. And part of that is dealing with evil. And he's not talking evil in a metaphysical sense. He's talking psychological evil, how evil plays out in our own psyches in such a way that we act out in a destructive way towards ourselves or others. And so the idea being is that if we see the evil out there and we fight against it, we've already lost because then we're playing evil's game. But if we
Yeah.
see the evil out there and we don't do anything, oh, I'm just going to do my prayers and mantras. Well, then by our turning a blind eye to it, we're also feeding it.
Yeah.
So it's actually, pointing at something. So on the one hand, being a dream, if you see evil out there, or madness out there, or Watiko from the Native American terminology out there, the idea is that it's reflecting something in us. And particularly if we're having a reaction, if we get triggered, yeah, what is that in us? So I think so many of us just prematurely see the evil out there, think it exists objectively, and then react to it, become conditioned by it, and then act out in a way that actually just is empowering it by making it real and creating separation. But if we have the recognition that, wait a second, I'm looking in a mirror, and etymologically, the word mirror means the holder of the shadow, then we have an opportunity to shed light on our own darkness. And you see what Jung says, which is so right on. He goes, the way to deal with the evil in the world is to illumine the evil in oneself. Once you become familiar with that, then you're coming from an empowered place of being able to be of benefit to the darkness of the world instead of just adding to it.
And I think it enables compassion to go back to sort of the Buddhist traditions, right? By seeing ourselves and everything and everyone else, then we are enabled to feel for them more so than like judge and be angry and engage in that kind of
Completely. And
combative.
that,
Yeah.
in Buddhism, they say the energetic expression of the realization of the dreamlike nature, or that we're not separate, or that we're looking in a mirror, is compassion. And, I really counsel people, myself included, don't underestimate the power, the nuclear power of compassion. And I'm not saying, oh yeah, we all just need to go and sit on our pillow and meditate. Yeah, absolutely, we need to go inwards and do our inner work, but don't leave it there, because the other half of the realization is that, wow, when you realize this is a dream, our inner process is manifesting in, as, and through the outside world. So the way to work on our inner process is not only by going inwards, it's almost like by having one eye turned inwards and the other eye turned outwards, and seeing that, oh my God, what's happening in the world is a reflection of what's happening in me. And then if I can be in service to the world, it's actually in service to myself. You see, and think about it, a situation where, wait, the outer and the inner are reflections of each other. That's
Mm.
an expression of a dream. That's what
Yeah.
Christ was trying to say. I mean, in the apocryphal text, he says, when you make the inner as the outer, that's when you enter the kingdom. Because think about it, when you're in a dream, you see, we've entranced ourselves. In essence, the malady, the sickness of our species is we've hypnotized ourselves. We've tricked ourselves out of our right mind. And a way to understand this is via the imagination. Imagine you're in a night dream and you're holding a viewpoint. Say the viewpoint you're holding in the night dream is that the world you're inhabiting in that night dream is real and solid and separate and objective. Well, being that the night dream you're in is nothing other than a reflection of your own mind, well, then it will have no choice but to give you all the evidence confirming your viewpoint that the world is objective. And now you have confirmation that how you're seeing is true, because you have all the evidence you need. So then you get even more fixed and entrenched in that viewpoint. And the more fixed and entrenched in that viewpoint of the world being objective, the more the dream will give you all the confirmation and evidence, that proves the rightness of your viewpoint ad infinitum, in a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is within your own mind. That's our situation. We have literally, by our own creative genius, put ourselves under a spell. We've brainwashed ourselves, hypnotized ourselves, and quantum physics is the medicine. It's showing us, it's shedding light on that process.
It's interesting. I keep saying that word, but there's so much resonance with a lot of the ancient mystical traditions. I mean, you mentioned that you're a student of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's as if these are truths that have been revealing themselves in different ways throughout history, and now the universe just seems to be speaking the language of science, which may be the terma that you're talking about. Like
Yeah.
in this moment, that's the language that people are speaking. So this would be most useful in terms of triggering that kind of enlightenment and engagement amongst folks.
Yeah, well, science is the modern day, it's the wisdom tradition of the West, and it's just really interesting. You see, the problem is what I call people have an objective reality hangover. Even though quantum physics has come along and it's completely, clearly, unambiguously shown that, oh no, there's nothing, the idea of an objective world is a nonsensical idea. It's total nonsense. There's no correlative reality in any way, shape, or form. But yet, in the unconscious of humanity, there's still this residue, the objective reality hangover. And, what I'm trying to point out is, yeah, when one person has, whatever degree of realization of that, that will incredibly help their lives and open up their hearts and help them access their creativity and connect with their true nature and unbelievable benefits. But that's minuscule compared to then, but the world is going mad and self-destructing. So what I'm continually pointing at is then what happens when more and more people who are having this lucid awareness, like in a dream where you have a lucid dream and are recognizing, oh, the dream that we're in is manifesting in such a nightmarish way because we've been traumatized and programmed and conditioned to dream it up this way. And when you bring people together who are seeing through that and who are realizing our incredible intrinsic power to create our experience, they can put, at least I imagine, their what I call their sacred power of dreaming, which is the part of us that's dreaming this waking dream into materialization each and every moment, but we don't know we're doing it. But as more and more people are waking up to that, we can connect with each other, get in sync with each other, activate our sacred power of dreaming in a way where we discover we can dream ourselves awake. And that's evolutionary. That's to realize we can consciously step into our own evolution. And that's what's being offered to us. That's the revelation. And we have everything we need. We don't need any outside messiah to come and save us. We are that. We already are, think of the quantum as like this magic, like talisman, like a magic wand coming down from heaven, free of charge. And it's changed our world. We've created all these technologies, but a lot of us don't even know we have it and we don't even know how to use it. And so we're already in possession of the solution. We are that, but we don't realize it. And that's what quantum physics, when you look at it in a certain way, because one of the quantum physicists said the greatest discovery or the greatest contribution that physics has made to the 20th century is that this universe we live in is malleable, that it's not written in stone, it's not fixed. And not only that, but even the past, quantum physics does something really interesting. It's like in the present moment, we tend to think that the past causes the present moment, but quantum physics says so does the future. It's as if the potential future, it extends itself back through time and actually attracts the present moment into actualizing itself. So the present moment is where it's like the handshake, where the past and the future, they're like holographically enfolded within the present moment. And not only that, but quantum physics has discovered that the past isn't complete until we observe it in the present moment, which is mind-blowing. The idea that, wait, my thought, my observation, my mind, when it's conceiving of something that's happened in the past, that something that's happened in the past is not written in stone, but me observing that seemingly past moment, actually influences that past moment and how it manifests. That's mind-blowing. And this is total shamanism. How often have we heard, oh, shamans, they travel back into the past. to change the past to effect change in the present moment. That's what quantum physics is tapping into. It's tapping into this incredible indigenous, this wisdom, that has been, passed down through millennia. And now all of a sudden it's coming through the wisdom tradition of science.
Do you think that there's realistically going to be within our lifetimes a mass realization of this stuff, or is that still a ways away in terms of like, it's only been 100 years and we are where we are,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
is
yeah.
the
Well,
moment going to force itself?
I can see it from both points of view. I could see it like, well, from one point of view, for the rest of our lifetimes, this world is going to be just, crazy like it is and getting crazier, and evil is going to come out and act itself out. And God only knows what's going to happen. That's one point of view. From another point of view, we've already awakened right now. Like Christ says, the kingdom of heaven is spread all over earth, and we just don't see it. You see that mind virus is a mind blindness, and that's why all throughout the Bible, Christ is talking about people have eyes but don't see. People have closed their eyes. They don't even know their eyes can see. And so the idea that, people right in this moment can open their eyes and see the nature of themselves and of the universe, that's not only a possibility, but atemporally, that's already happened. And we just have to remember that, because quantum physics actually, these are rigorous, hardcore scientists are saying, why can't we predict, or why can't we remember the future in the same way that we remember the past? How come time only goes in one direction where space goes in all directions? So, the idea being that we've been brainwashed and entrained and entranced and hypnotized and put under a spell, thinking this world and ourselves exist in a way that we do not. And one of the major ways of saying that is we've gotten entrained into thinking we exist as a separate self. And as soon as I identify as a third dimensional reference point in space and time, i.e., an ego, a separate self, guess what? You're an other. And if you're an
Yeah,
other, there's fear. And as soon as there's fear, that's the superfood for the mind virus. And that just self-replicates on that fear, you
yeah,
know? So what quantum physics is really offering us is to see through the illusion of that we exist as separate selves, and to recognize that we're interconnected and we depend on each other for our own survival. And like you were saying, out of that realization comes compassion, and then all bets are off. Then anything and everything is possible, because one of the things that quantum physics teaches us openly, freely, no charge, is it expands the realm of the possible to previously unimaginable degree.
yeah. If someone doesn't have the experience or the background in some of this stuff in terms of like a daily practice, or even the notion of how to pursue more dry intellectual research in this kind of stuff, how would you advise them to move forward and embrace this truth if they're just freshly coming upon it? I mean, it seems
Yeah, yeah,
huge
yeah.
if you're out of it. How would you say they get into it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally. Well, I would just say, it's so keep in mind, I'm not a physicist, and my new book, it's for people like me, like for lay people.
Yeah,
But the idea is to really, in a sense, just become an empiricist and just really inquire into the nature of your present moment experience. It reminds me of what the Buddha said. The Buddha, when he was teaching, he didn't say, oh, here's the teachings, here's the truth, and just believe this and take my word for it. No, he said, do the experiment yourself. Look within your own mind and see if what I'm saying is true. It's the same thing. So, and to even more extrapolate that, you know, we are creative beings. Like the greatest protection against evil or the mind virus or the totalitarianism, fascism that's creeping all over the planet is to be in touch with our nature. Well, what is our nature? Like I've been saying, it's to be creative. And so when you embody being creative and express yourself creatively, you deepen your realization of your nature. in a positive feedback loop that creates light upon light in a world of darkness. So the point being, our nature is creative. We are creating our experience each and every moment. For example, if meet somebody who says, "Oh, I'm not creative at all." There are such creative geniuses. They are literally creating the subjective experience of that they're not creative. That's how creative they are. They are creating that experience, and then they entrance themselves by the seeming truth of it. So we have this infinite creativity to create our experience. There's no one else who's creating our experience. We are. And so I'm not just talking about, oh, painting or drawing, but the way we wash dishes or go about our lives, all of it's creative. And to just, in other words, add light to that creative process in us or our resistance to it, because to the extent that you see, the greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. So to the extent we actually, like for example, there's this Russian philosopher, Berdiev, Nicholas Berdiev, who I have a chapter in one of my Watiko books, and he says he's really into, Christ and theology and the second coming. And he says, you want the second coming to arrive? Be creative. When any of us are being creative, we are offering ourselves as a vessel for the incarnating Christ to come through us as the second coming. But if we aren't creative, we will only then see the crucified, suffering-filled face of Christ instead of like being a channel for the resurrected Christ to come through us, you know? And so I just can't say enough about the profound importance of being creative, because that is our nature. I know for me personally, I went through a severe trauma. That was the very thing that created the pain and suffering for me to go inwards and connect with myself, discover to whatever degree I have, my nature. And if in that process, if I at a certain point didn't connect with my creative spirit, I would have been in deep trouble, you
Yeah.
know, you know.
It's interesting. You mentioned trauma again, the interesting. That seems to often be the crack sort of within the shell that allows sort of the light in. I've had trauma myself. Can you speak a little bit to that relationship between realization and trauma? What is it about trauma
Yeah, yeah,
that makes people vulnerable to insight?
yeah. Well, to take a step back, I talk about, I've written 3 books on this mind virus, the Watiko mind virus, and I point out that Watiko, it's a quantum phenomena in that holographically encoded in it, it's the source of evil. It's going to destroy us if we don't recognize what it's revealing. And yet it's a quantum phenomena, just like light is either a wave or particle, depending on how it's observed. Watiko is the source of the greatest evil, and it contains its own medicine. It actually contains its own healing, its own vaccine. And not only that, it actually is helping us to wake up, right? So how is Watiko going to manifest? Is it going to take us down and kill us or wake us up? Well, it depends if we recognize what it's revealing to us. Now, Watiko, one way of understanding Watiko, it got created out of trauma. Because think about it, we're in this whole state, but we're unconscious of our wholeness. Something happens, an overwhelming experience, and we can't integrate it in the normal way. We can't symbolically express it in the normal way. So we dissociate, we split because it's so overwhelming. That's trauma. And if that split off part, if we don't integrate it, it goes sort of rogue and becomes, in psychology speak, what's called an autonomous complex. And indigenous people call that a demon. And this demon, and that is Watiko, that autonomous complex, it develops in a way a quasi life or will seemingly of its own, contrary to the ego, right? So why I'm describing that's really trauma, where trauma is a sane response to an insane situation. Think about it. If I put too much pressure on my bone and the bone will break, the bone wasn't pathological. That was a healthy response to too much pressure. That's why trauma is a sane response to an insane situation. Now, the pathology of trauma, when we're traumatized, is the repetition compulsion. We just unconsciously recreate. We can't help but not to recreate the very trauma that we're trying to heal from in the
Yeah,
compulsion to repeat the trauma.
we're caught
That's
in
the
it, kind of. Yeah.
pathology. That's the symptom. And yet encoded in our doing that, we're trying to remember something. We're trying to consciously experience the very moment of trauma that we weren't able to experience when it happened because it was so overwhelming, and we split, we dissociated. And so encoded in trauma is actually in the pathology of trauma, we're actually trying to re-experience something so as to heal ourselves. And how is that trauma going to manifest? It could be tragic, and we spend the rest of our lives just compulsively reenacting our trauma in the repetition compulsion, or by enacting our trauma and bringing awareness to it and developing enough strength to stay present in it, we could actually then have a corrective experience and assimilate the trauma. And that energy that was fueling the compulsion to recreate the trauma all of a sudden becomes available for creative expression, you
Yeah.
know? And that's life transforming.
Yeah. And that creativity is the actual key to achieving that positive outcome, right? I mean, like we have to
Right.
dream that new reality, and that's the creative act.
Well, that's why in my third book on Watiko, because I point out that this mind virus it's a dreamed up phenomenon. We are dreaming up collectively the madness in our world, whatever you call it, the Watiko psychic epidemic, collective psychosis, whatever. And yet my third book in the of the trilogy of my Watiko books is called Undreaming Watiko, because I'm pointing out, well, we've dreamed up this insanity and we can undream it. That's within our power to do that. And if we don't actually awaken to that, then, we're fated to destroy ourselves. It's really that simple.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is that on my show, we've often talked about UAPs, NHI, that sort of thing, and that's expanded over the years to include a lot of encounter kinds of experiences where people are, dealing with or, basically, yeah, encountering agency from outside of themselves and outside of what they view as the human species, or at least, the physical human species. What is your thought in terms of a minded universe and whether or not the universe has some agency independent of us, or what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
a
yeah. Well, I have
case?
a
Yeah.
couple of thoughts. Like in quantum physics, they point out, like, one physicist talks about it's like the game of 20 questions, where everybody goes out of the room except like one person leaves and everybody decides on a word, and then the person comes back, and then by a series of questions, is it bigger than a bread box, is it an animal or a mineral, whatever, they then can guess the word. Well, but in the quantum, sort of like this version of 20 questions, the person goes out, and what if everybody decides, let's not decide on any word at all, but however we answer the question will determine the answer. So the person asks the question, and every answer takes longer and longer to answer, you know, and then the person might guess something, and there's an actual story one physicist tells, and everybody starts laughing because by them questioning, they created the very answer they got. And this physicist who had this experience says, well, the questions we asked determined the word that, at that moment got conjured up, but that's only part of it, because in a quantum experiment, the whole rest of the universe is involved too. So we can't just determine, we're not 100% in charge of, like, the answers we're going to get back. So the point is this, that's a roundabout way of getting to your question, because, for example, in my next book, I'm already almost finishing my next book, and it's about the greatest discovery in the 20th century in psychology, according to Jung, which is the reality of the psyche. Then, in other words, the psyche is, ontologically speaking, the most real thing in the world. And the point being, we experience, like for Jung, who discovered in his own way the reality of the psyche, there were living beings inside of him who were clearly part of him, but knew stuff he didn't know. So he subjectively experienced them as if they were some other beings who were living in his psyche. And yet, on another level, they were part of himself, not separate from himself. In the same way, say if there are alien intelligences or higher intelligences or angelic intelligences or extraterrestrial intelligences, right? On one level, we experience them as if they are other than ourselves, just like Jung experienced these beings who lived inside of his mind as other than himself. And yet, on a deeper level, when you wake up to the dreamlike nature of the universe, there's no separation anywhere. There's no separate beings anywhere. It's all just part of one. And being able to hold that paradox of, yes, they are absolutely separate and other than us, and they are not separate from us. That's the logic. That's the four-valued logic of quantum physics, of Buddhism, and of dreaming, that people who are entranced in scientific materialism, where things are either true or false, that's two-valued logic. No, understanding what I'm trying to present and what quantum physics and dreaming and Buddhism is trying to present involves a higher form of logic. Instead of is A or B true, A and B can both be true, even though they contradict each other. And that's to have an expansion of consciousness.
And that speaks to not only the reality of other intelligences in the universe, but also you and I. I mean, and humans generally, right? Like, I mean, we're part of the same system, we're part of the same universe, we're effectively unified, but at the same time, we're dreaming ourselves up as separate, so that manifests in our what we experience as objective reality.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that is,
to hold both points of view is true simultaneously. And
yeah.
that's what the human species has really suffered from, that almost an inability to hold contradictory viewpoints and to hold both as being true. And that's like almost like a superhero power that more and more of us are cultivating.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard there's been a discussion I've heard in the past about holons and holarchies, where I mean, and this is a little bit different than the quantum approach, but in terms of it makes every organism or part of a system both its own individual element of that system and then an integrated, organ of that system. And we've forgotten, I think, that we are part of the Earth body or the solar system body or the universe body, and we think that we're out there acting in the ether all on our own as independent,
Yeah, well,
uh,
it's like that's the idea of the real Sangha in Buddhism. The community is that we're all like parts of a greater, we're all these members of a greater body, or in Christianity, they talk about the mystical body of Christ. And it's very much like we're all cells in a greater organism, but some of the cells are like hoarding all the resources, and they have the majority of resources for themselves. And meanwhile, what they don't understand is by, just out of their greed or fear or whatever, by them doing that, it's actually going to kill the whole organism,
yeah,
including themselves.
yeah,
And that's a way of understanding what's happening in our world right now.
cancer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what if the cancer could just decide to not be cancerous? I mean, that's kind of the predicament we're facing. We need to decide that that's not the role in nature we want to play.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, we have. I mean, the thing is, you see so many people I talk to, with the dark goings on in our world, and there's endless things you can bring up. People so easily, feel despair or hopelessness or helplessness. And on one level, yeah, we're just one of 8 billion humans, and what can any of us do? But that's only, true on one level, because each of us have this unbelievable creative power and agency that we're unconscious of. And like for example, and maybe a good way to close is that quantum physics was really trying to understand what are the building blocks of this universe. What is the microstructure that this physical universe, is built on? And the more they went down into smaller and smaller scales, the more they didn't find anything physical, they found mind. And they coined a term, one of the terms is elementary particles. And these elementary particles that are the building blocks of everything, including ourselves, they exist in a state of potentiality, of any and every possible state they could ever exist in. At this moment, that's the state the elementary particle exists in, and then we observe it, and then one of those possibilities actualizes into manifest form, and all the others, they just dissolve into parallel worlds, and then the very next moment, the same thing happens. The point is this, is that even if one of those potential realities is highly ridiculously improbable, and that's a quote, it could manifest in this very moment. And what that means, that even the seemingly improbable world where enough of us, like the 100th monkey phenomena, could sufficiently awaken in this moment and thereby avert the myriad catastrophes and crises that are converging on us that we are creating. Quantum physics is saying that's completely within the realm of the possible, that we could wake up and actually have the recognition that we're not separate and step into that compassion and undream Watiko, and in a way add lucidity to the nightmare that we are creating. So quantum physics is saying that that's possible. And if you're not envisioning that, then what in the world are you thinking? Then you're caught by the mind virus. If you are like seeing through a lens of pessimism, then, by the dreamlike nature, you're just going to attract all the evidence confirming that, yeah, we are fucked. And then you're part of the problem, not part of the solution.
I have a friend who has another friend who overheard or asked David Bohm a question on that very subject, and basically the question was, how many would it take of people waking up to trigger potentially the revitalization, realization of the world? And after several minutes of a long pause, he said between 6 and 20.
Wow, interesting. Well, then
Yeah.
one final thing, and then I got to go. Like a friend of mine was hanging out with David Bohm and was sharing with David Bohm, oh yeah, in my dreams, I do physics experiments. And David Bohm goes, so do I, because it's so great because you can get all the funding you need in the lucid dream. And yeah, yeah, yeah. Because the point is, this is the dream. We can become lucid just like we can in a night dream. And when you connect with other people who have stabilized that lucidity, you can get in sync with each other, and in a way, to change the dream we're having. And that's not some sort of magical thinking. That's the nature of our situation. And our lives depend upon if we have that realization. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Thank
thank
you so much,
you.
Paul. I appreciate you.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. Really appreciate you so much.